Heyo, welcome back. This is my third sort of Oculus Quest tutorial, and I'll be going over how I built this jetpack functionality that allows you to fly around in VR like you have a jetpack on. It's pretty fun. It can be a little bit motion sickness inducing, so you may want to be careful with that and add some extra functionality to help prevent motion sickness. The functionality here is pretty simple. When you hold down both hand triggers, it's going to make you fly upwards like you're wearing a jetpack, and when you let go of both hand triggers, it's going to sort of let you down in a controlled fall. You've got a set amount of fuel, so you can only fly upwards for a couple of seconds, and then you start to sort of float back down. But when you land back on the ground, it does reset that timer so that you can take off again. I did try making a jump feature instead of this before I built the jetpack. And a jump feature in VR feels very sort of jarring and shaky, so I kind of abandoned that. I think if you're going to use a jump feature, you may as well just use a teleportation feature instead. The jetpack feature is a lot more fun and kind of makes things more of a smoother experience, so you're not getting like what feels like teleported up in the air and then falling back down. The default Oculus jump functionality is just not great. So, all that said, here we go. Alright, so what I'm doing is just copying the Oculus Quest blueprint project that I built in my previous video, and I'm going to use that as my template. So I've got that set up. I'm going to rename the folder to just Jetpack tutorial, and then I'm going to go ahead and add that to my Unity projects list here and get it opened up. So as you can see, it's pretty simple. I've just got a cube, and you can check out my other video for the full setup for the kind of this template here. But there's a few things I'm going to change to get this going. So I'm going to go to Project Settings under Edit, and I'm just going to change the product name from Oculus Quest Blueprint to Jetpack Tutorial or Jetpack Test. And this is so that it shows up as a different name when I build it to the Quest. And then I'm also going to change the package name here to Jetpack Test Arena, so that it's differentiated from my other projects. Then I'm going to go to time, and I'm going to change the fixed time step from 0.02 to 1/90, and that's going to adjust the frame rate so that it matches the sort of default frame rate for the Quest. And save the project, and we're good to go there. So we're going to be working, there's not a lot of setup. We're going to be working mostly with the OVRPlayerController and the OVRPlayerController script that Oculus has by default. But before we get into that, I'm going to go ahead and just set up some pillars for us to jump around on, so that we have some sort of just objects to fly between. So give me just a couple minutes here, and I will zoom or speed up this part and just zoom through and set up a bunch of different pillars here. So most of the rest of the work here is going to be done in a new C# script. So we're going to create a new script. We're going to name it Jetpack, and then we're going to drag that script onto our OVRPlayerController. And the OVRPlayerController already has a script which we'll look at in a second. But first, let's get this all set up here. So I've already wrote the code that's going to go in this Jetpack script in another file. So I'm going to paste that in, and when I paste it in, we'll see that there's a couple of errors that are returned, which highlight a few changes that we need to make to the Oculus OVRPlayerController script. And you can see those down in the console here. OVRPlayerController.fallSpeed is inaccessible, and then it says Jetpack cannot be the same as their enclosing type. So I just need to change the name of this function here from Jetpack to like new Jetpack. So I'm going to change that function name. You shouldn't have that problem. Just make sure that your function is different from your file name, or from your class name. But this OVRPlayerController fall speed being inaccessible, this is something that you will need to change. So to do this, we're going to go to the OVRPlayerController, and then you're going to open up this OVRPlayerController script, which is included. And there's a lot going on in this script, which is probably outside the scope of this tutorial. But all you need to know for this is you need to search for fall speed, which is going to be a private float variable here. And you just need to change that from private to public, which will allow other scripts to access that variable. So we've changed that, and we want to save that. And then if we go back to our other file, we can now see that those errors have been cleared up. So now that we've got those warnings cleared up and we've set that float value to public, there's one other thing that we need to change in our OVRPlayerController script. And for that, you want to search for the word positional. Positional. And you want to find, it's on line 348, that may change in future versions of this script. You want to search for no positional movement if we are in the air. This if statement is going to keep you from moving forward or backwards if you're off the ground. It's basically checking to see if controller.isGrounded returns false, then it sets move scale to 0.0f. So we do not want that to be the case, because we want to be able to move around while we're using our jetpack. So we're going to comment that whole if statement out, line 349 through 352 there. We're going to comment that out, and we're going to save the file. And that's all the changes that you need to make to the OVRPlayerController script. It is kind of an interesting script, and you should definitely check it out more. The character controller is sort of a default Unity object that comes with the Unity library. And then the OVRPlayerController is basically everything that the character controller needs to move around, to interact with the headset, with the Oculus controllers. There's a lot going on here, and that's... We'll dig into one other part of it in a little bit, but if you get a chance to just learn more about character controllers, there's a lot of like tutorials online about using a character controller. I'd recommend checking that out as well, because you'll understand what's going on here a lot better if you take the time to do that. There is one other thing that we want to do, which is to make sure that the snap rotation box here is not checked. That's kind of a personal preference. I don't like the snap rotation. It basically means if you move the thumbstick to the left, to the right, it's going to automatically sort of like teleport you 45 degrees. I like the gradual rotation as opposed to the 45-degree sort of rotation ratchet here. But again, that's personal preference. Keeping it enabled can help counteract motion sickness, so if you're prone to that, you probably want to leave that enabled. Okay. Everything else that we're going to be doing is going to happen in our Jetpack script. And you can see down here we've got 3 public sort of things that we can control. So we have fly time, and fly time is going to be how long you can fly up for. It's kind of like your fuel meter. How long can you fly upwards for before you reach your like height threshold? The fall velocity is going to be how quickly you fall back to the ground. It does have to be a negative number. If you put this as a positive number, you are going to float up indefinitely for just like forever. So you don't want to make this a positive number. And then lastly is lift velocity, and this is just how fast you fly up, or basically what is the velocity that you're going to be moving upwards with when you sort of enable the jetpack. And so all of these I sort of left as public because you'll probably want to tweak them and change them based on your own game and what you plan to be doing with it. So let's look at the actual code here. Jetpack.cs. We've got a lot of variables that we set up at the start. Then we have 2 declarations in our start function when the script begins. We have a couple of things going on in our update function. And then we've got one big function for new Jetpack. And we also have, nope, that's it. Everything else is in that Jetpack function. So let's start with just looking at what variables we're declaring here. We have a Boolean value for fuel, so this checks to see whether we can continue flying upwards or not. We have a float value, which is to track how much time has passed since we took off. We have a float value for how long we want to be able to fly upwards before we run out of fuel. And then we have a fall velocity float value. This is going to tell us how fast we're going to descend after we run out of fuel. We want to reference our character controller, so we want to get the private, we're declaring private character controller character, and we'll set that equal to this character controller here in the Unity window later on. We want to have a float for cancel gravity, and we're actually going to retrieve some information from the OVRPlayerController script to store in this variable here. We want our lift velocity float. We want a vector 3, so we're going to be setting our character controller to have a new vector 3 in order to create the Jetpack functionality. So we need to have a vector 3 to store that in. And then we need to have this Boolean for slow fall, which is sort of like turning gravity on and off. Didn't want to make it so you just fall back to the ground after you use your Jetpack, and so this sort of gives you a controlled descent after you run out of fuel in the Jetpack. The last 2 variables we have are a float for the left and right hand triggers, and you can look up the documentation for the OVR input, but basically the input for the left and right hand triggers return a float value from 0.0 to 1.0, with 1.0 being fully depressed and 0.0 being not depressed at all. So we want to retrieve that value and then reference it continuously to see if we're holding down the hand triggers. So in our start function, we are going to set character equal to the character controller component that is also on the OVR player controller. So we're just grabbing this character controller to reference it. And then we also want to set cancel gravity equal to the gravity equation from the OVR player controller. This equation is kind of complicated, and it took me a while to understand it. You can pretty much just copy this exactly as it is here. We're doing physics.gravity.y times get component OVR player controller gravity modifier times 0.002f. This actually is an equation from the other script, which I'll show you. So if we search for gravity, you can see they have a public float gravity modifier here, and it's already public. And then they have, this is their if statement for, and their calculation for gravity. So they're sort of artificially creating a gravity equation and applying it to the character controller, so you don't have to do that part. If you were sort of coding the code for this character controller from scratch, you would have to code all of this, but they already have it done for you, which is nice. And so we can kind of just borrow what they have going on here. So they have their if statement here, and they're setting fall speed to equal this equation when the character is on the ground and not falling. So I've basically copied that, and we're going to store it in this this float variable called cancel gravity, because we want to essentially counteract the gravity that they're setting up here when we use our jetpack. We want to cancel that out. So we want to have a reference to this so that we can basically sort of counteract what they're doing here. So complicated, but if you copy this, you should be good to go. And then in our update function, we are doing basically 3 things here. We're continually redeclaring our float values for the left and right triggers so that we can have those updated in real time. If you were to put these in your start function, it will only store the variable once, and then your function won't work. So you've got to make sure to put these in the update function. Then we're going to call our Jetpack function, and then we're going to calculate our new character controller move velocity. So to do that, we're doing character.move, and then we're multiplying move direction, which is our vector 3 from up here. We're calculating move direction times time.delta time. And if you have questions about why we're doing that, I would look up a couple of other character controller tutorials, because there's a lot of really good ones out there on the internet. I know Brackeys has a few. Okay, and so finally let's look at the actual code that we're using for the Jetpack itself. So we're setting our move direction for our vector 3 back to 0. Vector 3.0 is just shorthand for vector 3 dot, you can see shorthand for writing vector 3 and then in parentheses 0, 0, 0. So the first thing we're going to do is we want to check if we run out of fuel. That's always the first thing we want to do. If you put this later on in the function, it could kind of get funky. So we're going to check if time is greater than fly time. And remember, fly time is our public variable that we set to determine how long we can fly for. If time is greater than fly time, then we set our fuel boolean equal to false. So we've run out of fuel. Then we want to check to see if both hand triggers are grabbed, and is fuel still true. So do we still have fuel left in the tank? So if Jetpack left and Jetpack right are greater than 0.9, because remember 1.0 is fully depressed for the hand trigger, so 0.9 is almost all the way depressed. So if it's greater than 0.9 and fuel is still set to true, then we want to start time. So we want to start our timer. So time plus equals time.delta time. This basically means for every second that passes, or for every second that passes, time should equal 1. And then remember, time is being referenced up here as well. So when time exceeds fly time, our fuel is going to be set to false, and then this if statement will no longer run. So time plus equals time.delta time. Then we want to get component OVRPlayerController.fallSpeed, and we want to set it equal to our cancel gravity script. So basically what we're doing is we're setting fall speed equal to the equation they have for fall speed when the character is grounded. And this equates out to a little stronger than 0. So you're going to be slowly falling, but you're not really falling that much. You're sort of like gently floating down to the ground as opposed to falling extremely fast like you would normally. So we're setting the fall speed in OVRPlayerController equal to cancel gravity. And then we're going to increment our y velocity on our move direction vector 3 to create upward velocity. So move direction dot y, so we're only grabbing the y coordinate from move direction, and then we're going to do plus equals lift velocity. So that's the public float value that you have set earlier. So this would be 10 in this case. So we're adding 10 every frame to our move direction dot y, and then we're going to set slow fall equal to true. And so this means that we want to use the sort of slow descent as opposed to the instant fall that OVR has already. Okay, almost there. So if we land back on the ground, we want to set slow fall back to false because we don't want to always glide down. We want gravity to have effect most of the time. But if we're just descending after using a jetpack, we want slow fall to be true. So if we touch the ground, character.isGrounded, then slow fall is going to be false. We're going to set time back to 0 so that our fuel tank is sort of full again, and then we're going to set fuel back to true, and that will allow us to take off again as soon as we touch the ground. And then finally, if slow fall is true, which should mean we're still in the air, then we want to negate the gravity equation from the OVR player controller. So we're going to do the same thing we did earlier. We're going to get component OVRPlayerController.fallSpeed, and we're going to set it equal to cancel gravity. And then I added this just because I wanted to kind of change the mechanics of how it worked. So once you run out of fuel, you actually fall to the ground faster. So if fuel is equal to false, then move direction.y plus equals fall velocity. And remember, fall velocity here has to be a negative number. Otherwise, when you run out of fuel, you will begin to just drift upwards, and you won't be able to come back down to the ground at all. So what happens basically when this function is run, our move direction.y is kind of, we're adding a bunch of different values to it, and then finally, after this function runs and calculates those values, then we put that value into a character.move here. And so then that determines whether we move up or whether we move down. So that is everything I've got here. That should get you up and running and flying around in the Jetpack. As always, if you have any questions or if you have any feedback on how I can make this better, don't hesitate to let me know. And of course, you could also always change this to be more like a jump function. You could change these inputs to be, just like your A button or the primary triggers, so that you just press A once and you kind of go up and come back down. You could change a lot of this to sort of get different functionality just by tweaking, something here or something there. So I hope this was helpful, and